Hello everyone, this is Moehawkman and welcome to Farming for New Members 101. Now in this guide I'm not going to go into major details about later things, like for instance player owned farms or just high level things in general, because this is obviously not for those types of players. And by then you'll have already understood how farming works anyway, so you won't need that type of information in this video. So first of all, let's start off with some basics of farming. Farming is done in growth stages depending on the type of produce that you're going for. Let's take potatoes for example, which is the thing that you will be using at level 1. It has 4 growth stages of 10 minutes each. And obviously the higher level stuff you make, the more growth stages and the longer it takes usually for those things to grow. Now let's move on to composting, which is one of the most basic requirements to farming. Now there are 3 types of compost: normal compost, super compost, and ultra compost. Now I'm not going to talk about normal compost because you won't be using those, and ultra compost, you won't be using those until mid to high level things because it's not worth it at the low levels to use because it costs like 20,000 coins per ultra compost, and you will be using a lot, so that becomes a major issue unless you have the money for it. Now to make super compost for free, you want to teleport to the Karamja lodestone and pick the 5 pineapple plants, yielding 25 total pineapples. Now you only need 15 to start a compost bin, and if you want to start multiple bins at the same time, you can either hop worlds to grab 25 more pineapples, or just wait in the current world because the timer is not too long, it's only a couple minutes or so. Afterwards, you just wait 90 minutes for the compost to complete, and then you grab 15 empty buckets and empty the bin. Now there is one thing you should know, is that you can use the tool leprechaun nearby and he can hold your extra compost for you, regardless of whether that's normal compost, super compost, or ultra compost. And he can also hold empty buckets so that you don't have to carry around the buckets with you every time you go. You can just go to him, take them out, and then put them back whenever you need to. Now another very good useful feature of the tool leprechaun is that he can actually note your produce for you. So if you happen to have a full inventory of potatoes or herbs or whatever it is that you plan on making, you can just use the produce that you have on the leprechaun and he will automatically note them all for you for free. You don't have to pay for anything, and then you just go to the bank and then bank it all. This is how you can do an effective farming run without having to constantly bank back and forth. Now, as for limits with the tool leprechaun, he can hold up to 255 empty buckets, and for super compost he can hold up to 2,000 if I remember correctly, but chances are you're probably not going to bank that many. You'll most likely either use them yourself or sell them before you even get to maybe 1,000 or so, unless you like hoarding. Now, if you do need empty buckets to hold your compost, there are 3 shops that you can go to. One of them is quest locked, but the quest is pretty easy. And 2 of the shops that you can access early on are one in Taverley, and the second one is in Catherby. And they're both next to a tool leprechaun, so you can actually just grab all the empty buckets and store them and then just run back and forth. Now they only hold 100 empty buckets, but they're only 2 GP each, and the Grand Exchange sells them for like 100 something, so if you want to save a little money and use maybe a couple of minutes, then you can just use that method to get the buckets. And the buckets refresh every day, so you can pretty much get infinite amount of buckets for cheap. Now let's talk about the payment protection system. So certain produce items can be protected if you have the amount of produce that they want. For instance, to protect potatoes, you need to have 2 compost buckets and they will protect that specific plot. So if you have 2 sets of potatoes going, you actually need 4 compost. And obviously the more farms you have, the more stuff you'll need to protect, but most of them are pretty cheap to get, or some of them are even free to get because you can just pick them yourself. Or if you were already growing the previous item, that is what you will need. Now there is an additional way to help protect certain things. For instance, the flower pot in the middle of the allotments and the herb patches can usually protect specific types of produce items. For instance, marigolds can protect onions, tomatoes, and potatoes, while rosemary, a little bit higher level, protects cabbages, and a scarecrow protects sweet corns, and a nasturtium protects watermelon. But if once you get the higher level stuff, you can actually produce white lilies, and that protects all allotment type items, no matter how high of a level they are. Now, when it comes to protecting certain allotment things, they will always use something one tier below it. Like for example, onion seeds require potatoes to be used as protection. Or if you're going to grow cabbages, you need a sack of onions. Or tomatoes, you need a sack of cabbages. And so on and so forth. Usually, the higher stuff uses a tier lower than it in order to protect it. But if you're using flowers, you don't even need to worry about protection. Now, there is one little slight tidbit information. For allotments, you need 3 of that seed to grow something. Versus most other types of produce, you will need only 1. Like flowers, you only need 1. Herbs, you only need 1. Fruit trees and other trees, you only need 1. So you just keep that in mind, but you'll remember that later on regardless. Now let's talk about some useful items to help your farming runs a bit more effectively. Like I said before in the previous video, I hope that you activated the lodestone teleport network because this will help you get between areas rather quickly. Like for instance, the Catherby farming area is right near the lodestone. And the same can be said about the Artie farm next to the player-owned farm. It is right near the lodestone. So having that activated is very useful. Another useful item to have is the Explorer's Ring 3 from the Draenor and Lumbridge task. This will allow you to use the cabbage teleport to get to the Falador farm because it's just north of that teleport once you have finished the animation. So that is very useful in that aspect. Now another useful item that is good to make your farming runs more efficient is to have farming urns in your inventory. They work just like all the other urns. Get farming XP and it will give you more farming XP once it has been completed and teleported away. Now depending on the urn that you're going to use, the XP amounts are different. Decorated farming urns are the highest tier right now, and they give 1400 upon completion. And the lower one, I think, gives you 1100, but it is faster to fill. So it's really up to you. If you can craft the urns yourself, I would personally suggest that because the decorated farming urn is a little expensive. I think it's just under 5k the last time I checked, but I make them myself, so I don't really worry about that. Now, one last thing that I suggest you do, if you have the requirements, I suggest you do the quest A Fairy Tale Part 1 Growing Pains. Now, the reason why you do this is because at the end of the quest, it gives you a reward called Magic Secateurs. And this has a very good benefit because it gives you increased farming yields of 10% when you're harvesting allotments and herbs and hops, but I don't farm hops. So for example, if you had ended up farming 10 things, you would have gotten 11 with this. And combining with super compost, sometimes if you are planting herbs, you can get like 13, 14, even 15. But those are a little rare. Now there are other useful items, but most of those are higher level things. Like for instance, the Falador shield gives you more farming XP when you're at the Falador farming area. But that requires you to complete certain amounts of Falador tasks. And some of them cannot be completed unless you have much higher levels and have done more quests. And I believe that covers everything about the overall basics of farming for new players who have never done farming before. Now, once you get to the higher levels, you will understand why farming is one of the skills I personally recommend raising up because of just the overall benefits of it. You can grow your own herbs for pretty much free. You can grow all your additional items and you can make so much money from farming in the long run if you're willing to put in the extra time. And it doesn't even take that long to do farming runs. If you don't have a lot of plots or you only have certain amounts of things that you're growing, you can do a farming run in 10-15 minutes tops, and then you just replant all your seeds and wait for all the growth stages to complete while you're doing something else. Like for instance, if you're doing Slayer or raising other skills that you like, or even if you're questing, and then you just come back after your quest is done and just do another farm run, and boom, you just make random amounts of supplementary income. This is why farming is so good, because you just make income while you're doing other stuff without even trying. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This has been your fellow RuneScaper Moehawkman. Have a nice day everyone, be kind to one another, be safe, peace out everyone.